Sorry,
Welcome
I was
back
trying
to the
to.
Void FM podcast. Bill, you okay?
Yeah, I was just trying to like convert all of the mental energy to this moment, and so I had to kind of.
Did it work?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly a little more embarrassed now,
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. How
which
you
is a
been?
good thing. I've been good, man. I've been good. As you can see, I did a little bit of decorating. Yeah, we got a little moon there. A little, you can't tell, but it's a Bulma picture that is all glowy. Moved the TV. So anyway, that took me the entire weekend to put up those three things. So
How does that work? Why 3 days?
well,
Why a whole weekend?
I get real tired real easy. And so I put one up and I was like, oh, I think it's time for like a little EP, time to take a nap, you know?
Hey man, it's good that you know your boundaries, you know?
Yeah, of course. How was your weekend?
Bit of a personal question.
Yeah, but this is a personal podcast.
Yeah, it's been good. It went good. I mostly working on the new project that's been, taking up a lot of my RAM, but just like attention in general because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
And I keep having different ideas and stuff. So mostly that, but also watched stuff, went out, and just general life things. But
Hell
I'm
yeah.
good.
Nice. So what are we talking about today? That's the real question.
Oh, when you like to know. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to drink it like this.
Yeah. Absolutely not sponsored, by the way.
No. Oh, wait, yeah, I displayed the logo. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Today, we're going to be talking about Spotify, a little bit of insider baseball for folks, because Spotify is one of those things that everybody has an opinion on, whether they use it, whether they don't, whether they're an artist who have their music on Spotify or they listen to music on Spotify. I think it'd be cool to maybe go over some stuff, dispel some rumors, provide clarity on certain things because it certainly deserves its own conversation. And we have insider information, not in the sense that we work for Spotify, but we get a check every month from streaming revenue. And most of it comes from Spotify. And so we're in a position where we have an important relationship with the platform. We kind of, at least in part, depend on them. And because of Spotify, you and I were initially able to quit our day jobs. I was in a pretty good project manager position for a Japanese software company, and Spotify passively started making me more money on the side. So there's a lot of good that you and I have seen in our lives come from having our music readily available to people.
For sure.
But we also have a lot of concerns. There's definitely a lot of concerns and problems with Spotify that we will be able to highlight. So why don't we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea. I feel like in my like day-to-day interactions with people who are just like completely not content brained or don't do anything like that, just normal people, a lot of people have very strong opinions about Spotify, specifically the amount that gets paid out. But when I talk about it with people, they always almost assume that like that's not where a bulk of my income would come from. Yeah. Or that it's just kind of like, oh man, it sucks to be a musician. And well, like there is like a part of it that it does suck because you could be getting paid more. Like you can live pretty comfortably off of Spotify, which is an interesting thing, not from like a super high level either. You know what I mean? And so it all adds up. But I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the whole thing. So I think it'd be a good way to talk about it and dispel some rumors and stuff.
You are now tuning in into... You
gotta leave it in, bro.
I agree, Bill. You are now tuning in to Void FM.
Okay. What the field of view looks like.
Welcome.
So, I actually have some notes this time around.
Whoa.
These might be somewhat outdated. I was taking notes for a video I wanted to shoot last year on the subject matter. And I ultimately never got around to it, but I can still use these notes to guide the conversation somewhat.
For sure. For sure.
Let's take a look.
This is just a aside, and I know we're going to talk about this a lot. I feel like you should still make that video. It's
You
a really
think
cool
so?
idea. I think that you'd be a good person to make that video.
I appreciate it. Where should we start this conversation, Bill? Maybe we should provide some context in terms of like our transition again. We've talked about transitioning from our old jobs to this one, so I don't want to go over it too much, but I will offer a little bit of transparency in order to, I guess, qualify my opinions here. My annual earnings from all the music stuff that I do are roughly $250,000 a year. Over the last few years, I've gotten over 100 million streams on Spotify alone, over 100,000 Spotify followers. I've charted on Billboard a number of times. We've sold out. You've charted on Billboard a number of times. We've sold out shows. We've sold out 700 plus people rooms. Sold thousands of units of merch in under 24 hours, time and time again. And above all, over the course of our 10 plus years respective careers, we've amassed a very loyal following. All the while operating independently, uploading most of our music using DistroKid's services, not sponsored. And DistroKid's services are publicly available to everyone. It's an important thing for me to point out because the bar of entry for having your music out has changed quite drastically. And when you and I were putting out music early on in our careers, you didn't really have a Spotify, and to get your music up on iTunes was possible, but it was a little bit more complicated and also was kind of useless because people didn't just like scour iTunes for new music like that.
For sure.
You know? There weren't algorithms built around that. So we use primarily DistroKid, which is like has a fixed annual fee that you pay, and then you get to collect all of your royalties without sharing a percentage with DistroKid, as far as I know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done stuff through CD Baby before and stuff, and they take a small
Same.
cut. I've done stuff through. I remember actually. It's funny that you say that about putting stuff onto iTunes. I actually put up a song on iTunes back in like 2010. It's not there anymore, but I used a service called TuneCore, and it was just a single. It was like a song. I don't really like the song anymore, but it was a song with me and my friend. And at the time, it was like a big deal to say. It was also difficult to get it on there. I remember using TuneCore, and it was like I had to like sign a thing, and I'm pretty sure like I signed away the rights to that song to them when I did that. Like, I don't know, I assume. Yeah, like I remember like showing my friends and being like, oh yeah, and then people would be like, dude, you made it. And it was like, it made me like fucking $3 total or something at the time. But at the time, like everybody looked at it was like, oh shit, it's like you can buy that shit on iTunes. Like you did it. Nowadays, I feel like it's a very different, but it was harder.
TuneCore is also is similar to DistroKid. They provide the same services these days, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it was the same back then. It was just more complicated, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the exact same services. I mean, you could do that with DistroKid as well. You can put stuff on iTunes, but it's called an aggregator.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, I'm not a mainstream success by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm certainly successful enough to where remaining independent is actually in my best creative and financial interest. And I'd say similar situation for you.
For sure.
Less.
Yeah.
Because we get to feel fulfilled in our jobs and are afforded a great deal of autonomy and comfort. You know what I mean? Being independent, being your own boss means we don't have to split our income with any label as such. And also we don't get to work with any creative constraints imposed by any outside forces, right? Unless, of course, we let audiences' opinions sway us. But there is no one, breathing down our necks saying you can't be doing that or put out this kind of song.
Yeah. There's no like, oh, dude, you got to do one for TikTok. You know what I mean? In the same,
we
any
get to
kind
do
of,
whatever the fuck we like, right?
Yeah, which is
Whenever we
wonderful.
like.
It is wonderful. I think to be clear, though, I'm not against the idea of signing to a label, especially one that's not a major label. It just doesn't really make sense for me or for you right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've rejected a lot of offers because nothing's been put forward in front of me that has really appealed to me. We have done distribution stuff before. So through ADA, which is a subsidiary of Warner, we released some stuff. I had a distribution deal with them at one point. Just for clarity, distribution is different to being signed to a label per se, because distribution just means exactly what the name suggests, distributing the music, providing people access to the music. It's not a record label in the sense that they don't help you assemble the record, It's just they help put it out. In the same ways that DistroKid is a distribution label as well. It's just DistroKid is accessible to everyone who has a little bit of money, whereas ADA and some other ones are a little bit more exclusive comparatively. I would draw that distinction.
For sure. And it's different between deals. I know that, like, typically speaking, the way I look at it is like with a label deal, it comes together. Like, it's usually like a label deal and a distribution deal come together. The first person I saw that was doing just distribution that I knew of was Macklemore for the Thrift Shop, that album. And I remember that being a thing. Yeah, basically they usually come hand in hand if you do get signed to a label, but usually a label will put a budget behind you to be like, hey, like here's something that's kind of like a loan. Whereas like a lot of distribution deals aren't really like that. They usually just take out of profits. But of course, the difference, there's different deals all over the place. So what I'm speaking isn't gospel here,
For sure. But yeah, I just wanted to get all of that out of the way to preface the conversation, to provide just a little bit, for those who are perhaps maybe new to this podcast, provide you with some of our background information so that you may have better understanding of why we have opinions in the first place on the subject matter. I guess it's a way to qualify that a bit, but ultimately we're just some very lucky guys with some strong opinions, about our job, our peers, co-workers, and our bosses within this industry, as it were. Because even as independent artists, we still very much depend on the existing infrastructure, of which Spotify is very much a huge part of. And we're not journalists, but again, we are people from within this industry who'll just be sharing some of our personal insights. So yeah, let's talk about Spotify.
Let's talk about it.
I'm pretty sure it's a similar situation for you. Aside from touring and my occasional online store merch drops, I make most of my money passively from people streaming my music. Over 90% of my streaming audience and revenue consists of Spotify users, right? So out of the 100% total of people who listen to my music, 90% of them consume it through Spotify. It's not close. There's no like close second place. I just want to put that out there. Spotify was founded somewhere nearly like 20 years ago in 2006 in Stockholm, Sweden. According to their own website, Spotify is a digital music, podcast, and video service that gives you access to millions of songs and other content from creators all over the world. Basic functions such as playing music are totally free, but you can also choose to upgrade to Spotify Premium. I would also like to attach another thing about Spotify here, something that Jim Anderson once said, who is a former Spotify executive. Spotify was created to solve a problem. The problem was this: piracy and music distribution. The problem was to get artists' music out there. The problem was not to pay people money. And I think this is very telling and is going to be the underlying theme, I think, of much of this conversation.
Yeah.
Just briefly, context-wise, Bill, I remember a period of time where, piracy was all the rage, like LimeWire, BearShare, basically torrenting your music as a means of acquiring music or getting it off of DatPiff, and stuff like that. Free access to music. The moment it became a thing, it spread like crazy. It was hard to convince people to go and spend money on copying music for money when people were able to access it for free. And so the music industry started to shift in a direction where I think more artists started to tour so that they could make money that way. More artists started to branch out outside of just music, and pursuing entrepreneurship of various kinds. So there was certainly a problem within the music industry in terms of trying to monetize music. And I think streaming music through places like Apple Music, Spotify, and Deezer became the answer to that piracy, because here you have access directly to the music. You don't even have to torrent. You don't have to dig for it for a very long time. You could just type something in and you have access to all of it just for a small fee once a month, a subscription fee. And it worked. I think it worked quite successfully because these days, when I talk to the younger generations, many of them haven't pirated a thing in their lives.
Yeah.
Which is insane to me, because at one point that's the only way I got access to things was through piracy.
Yeah, like it was to the point for me. I remember I had really, really slow internet. Like I had dial-up growing up, and I had a friend who had like cable internet. And so I would literally like go over to his house and we would just sit there for hours and just download shit and just burn CDs. And then I'd be like, oh shit, I got this thing. And like it was like a cultural thing for a lot of people. Like not that specific thing, but like the act of piracy with specifically music. I mean everything, but music was a big thing. Yeah. Nowadays it's just kind of something like, why would you need to when you can, the convenience of having everything at your fingertips all the time? Why would you spend time on doing
without
that?
having to waste space on your phone or your laptop or your hard drive, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
And you can playlist things directly on the platform, and it has this algorithm that over time identifies trends within your music consumption and begins to suggest music that it thinks might work. Just like, a TikTok algorithm or a YouTube algorithm would work with suggesting something new to you, and if you skip it, don't listen to it, it'll be like, okay, so not quite like this. Try a different thing until it figures you out pretty well. And I think, in my personal experience, the longer you use Spotify, the better the algorithm knows you, the more difficult it is to stop using Spotify because you kind of start becoming somewhat dependent on it. There are plenty of shortcomings, of course. Like, there's not all of music is available on there. There's a lot of shit that I wish was on there, like the Katamari, OST, or Mos Def's Ecstatic album, etc. There's a lot of albums that are missing from Spotify.
Yeah.
Usually, if they are missing from Spotify, though, they'll probably be missing from Apple Music and other streaming services as well. So for those joints, I think people will resort to either pirating it or copying it on iTunes or in physical format, or just staying on YouTube and finding old uploads.
I feel like most of that stuff, that's the thing for me, is like, I feel like with most artists that I fuck with, there's like one or two songs that are like my favorite joints for whatever reason. Those are the ones that are never on Spotify, the forbidden song, you know what I mean? And sometimes you'll see people actually like in Playboy Cardi's case, for example, people will literally make accounts that will upload those songs that aren't there, and they'll probably make a lot of money and then get sued for it. Yeah. But I've always just turned to YouTube or SoundCloud. That was the big thing. But when people were using SoundCloud actively, I guess they still do, but more. I would use SoundCloud as like a backup a lot of the times. When you're in the car and you want to hear that one song, you can just pull it up from your SoundCloud likes. But yeah, for the most part, it was just Spotify for me. The algorithm that's a part of it that I never really analyzed. The idea of like a tastemaker I've heard so much new stuff through that. I know we talked about tastemakers nowadays in music, and I feel like the algorithm really is that. And that's a strong point that it had that a lot of things didn't coming up. Yeah.
100%. So let's talk about how much Spotify pays us, their artists, right? For the content and value we provide their platforms with. So first off, for some clarity, since a lot of people won't actually know this, Spotify doesn't make equal payments according to how many streams you get. They pay artists a percentage of a set amount according to the total number of streams across their entire platform. So it's like a shared pool of funds. And depending on the Spotify economy, how much a stream is worth will fluctuate, so to speak. In my own anecdotal experience, I've observed that over a third of a single penny is made per listen on average on Spotify, so long as a song is listened to for at least 30 seconds. I believe 30 seconds is the threshold. I may be wrong. They may have changed that. But basically, if you play 20 seconds of a song and then skip it, it won't register it as a play. And it won't pay the artist you listen to for those 20 seconds. Because they'll just assume you just skipped the song. So that's just over $3,000 per 1 million streams. So let's round that upwards and say $4,000 per 1 million streams, right? Just to make it clear how these metrics work. This sum, which goes to the artist or team, depending on what royalty splits look like you, of course. The more producers, writers, managers, etc. involved will require further fragmented splits. Makes up approximately 70% of the total royalty-based revenue made from said 1 million streams. The remaining 30% go to Spotify. So Spotify takes a 30% cut. Competitor Apple Music, at around 15% of all the pay-for streaming market currently, is the second most popular digital streaming platform. We'll just refer to them as DSP for short going forward as well to make our lives easier. So again, 15% of all the pay-for streaming market, second largest, Apple. I don't know. That to me is pretty crazy. That's just in terms of their user base. Anyway, both Spotify's and Apple Music subscription services are priced similarly, as far as I know. So with me saying that Apple is like 15%, I hope it again highlights the dominance, the market dominance that Spotify has. According to some reports from earlier last year, Apple Music has approximately 90 million subscribers. All these stats will probably be a little bit outdated, but not in a drastic way, I would imagine. Spotify has 210 million paid subscribers and over 515 million users overall. Apple doesn't even have 100,000. So again, the market dominance is pretty outrageous. Spotify still makes money off the non-paying user base too, of course, through advertisement. So it's somewhat frustrating to see so much press coverage from both like news sites and content creators in general on the subject matter. Time and time again document Spotify only as roughly a third of the music streaming market, simply because the figures have been selectively sourced based on subscriber data alone, which I find silly at best and like deliberately disingenuous at worst, because in doing so, we fail to accurately convey and grasp the full extent of Spotify's market dominance. Unlike Spotify, Apple Music doesn't have a user base outside of its subscription services. So the 90 million that Apple has, the subscribers, that is what they have. That's it. But even if you're looking at the subscription figures alone, with over double the second largest DSP's user base, Spotify is indisputably the dominant force in the music streaming world, which also happens to be the most common way in which music is consumed these days, with roughly 83% of all music industry revenue reportedly coming from said format. Another thing that is crazy to me, because it literally not that long ago, the industry was in a completely different position. In terms of like, I don't know, it feels like almost like an overnight change. I know that it's like almost 10 years in the making or whatever, but it feels crazy just how dominant streaming is. Also, although the percentages are currently lower in Europe and Asia, all countries around the globe are increasingly adopting streaming as their primary format for listening to music. We're seeing that trend all over the world.
For sure.
Spotify technology annual operating expenses for 2022 were $13 billion, which is reportedly a 15.21% increase from the year prior. So I've seen some people online refer to this costly upkeep as the excuse for why Spotify's payout to their artists is so dog shit compared to a majority of their competitors, such as Apple and Tidal, who clearly have a demonstrably smaller user base by comparison. Spotify has certainly not been blowing all their money on APIs and service space alone, though, as Spotify appears to have been increasingly insistent upon burning through much of their money, buying out more and more podcasts and audiobook licenses as time goes on. You know, Joe Rogan is one of the big ones that I think most people are familiar with. Was it like $100 million?
Yeah. It was just a stupid amount of money for what that was.
Amount.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is largely in part due to said formats allowing Spotify to monetize advertisement space on their platform. In my view, the recent introduction of video format implementation to the platform will likely ultimately serve Spotify's similar intended purpose, or at least that's why I think they're moving into that territory, trying to maximize their profits as per usual,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
Capitalism. Spotify is forecasted to generate over $400 million on podcast advertising earnings this year, which would be more than double that of their podcast advertising earnings last year. And even though they'd still be losing money on the podcasting front, Spotify confidently claims that podcasts will generate more profit for them than music does within a mere handful of years. And who knows? Maybe that could turn out to be true.
I could see it.
That idea terrifies me because
For sure.
it places us musicians even lower, you know, like in terms of like if we start to generate less money for them than podcasts. I don't know. It feels like we already don't have a say in any of this. As
Facts.
you and I know very well, but it feels like the less worth we have to Spotify and others, then there will be even less regard for our well-being. But you know, it is what it is.
I mean, I think that's it's inevitable to happen in some sort of way. I feel like maybe this is just me being cynical from all the years of them just kind of like, how can we make it worse for the people that are kind of driving home this this product that we're selling? Because they're kind of selling us, really. You know,
Yes, for sure.
At the end of the day, it's you're selling the work of someone else, right? Which I don't think is inherently. Yeah,
we
I don't
provide them with the labor and value.
I don't think that's inherently bad. And I understand that like a lot of people are put into a position like us where we're like super duper lucky where it's like, holy shit, this is this cool thing that you can live off of. But I know that they do not care about me or people like me at all. And it's a kind of a dystopian way of looking at, I guess that's kind of a capitalism thing, but like just,
for sure.
Yeah. Like, I feel like it's like a dystopian future of just kind of like, okay, you make things and we don't care, you know?
It also doesn't fill us with confidence about the predictability of pay, you know? Things could turn on a dime and we would have no say in it, and we would just have to kind of accept whatever reality we find ourselves in next. So is there anything being done to address issues concerning inadequate compensation for the artists? Well, Spotify continues to extract value from the dominant grip of their ever-growing archive each year, as their seemingly infinite catalog and ever-dominant presence in the streaming space only continues to grow. And yet, there are still no plans, as far as we know, to address the issue of adequate pay for artists. Instead, Spotify continues to make up in my eyes, insulting excuses, which are sadly for the most part left unchallenged in any meaningful capacity, for why they nevertheless cannot, nor do they intend to, ever figure out a way in which they could pay their artists better, who again, as a reminder, provide the value to the industry in the first place. It's the music industry, and we are the ones who cultivate the music. Spotify wouldn't be shit without the music on it. It wouldn't get to the point where they have money to pay for exclusive deals with these big time podcasters and stuff had they not built their value off of the value we've provided them with, right?
Yeah.
That's an important thing to recognize. But let's put a pin in that for a moment and instead consider yet another curious fact. Spotify pays the major labels yearly advances to keep their music on the platform. So, okay, what should the average person know about major record labels? Briefly on that, right? Major record labels make up over 85% of the entire music industry. And how many major record labels does it take to make up 85% of the entire music industry? Just 3.
It was 4.
It was 5. It was 5 or 6 when I was born.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like this is happening with all industries, right? Mergers and oligopolies getting closer and closer to just outright monopolies. Anyway, it's just 3. And although this oligopoly is historically an ever-shrinking one, well, actually, who knows, man? By the time we put this out, maybe there's only 2 or 1. You know, it's the industry moves so quickly, right?
We gotta upload quick.
Check this before taking my word for it, depending on when you're listening to this. At the time of us filming this podcast, recording this podcast, the 3 entities that, for all intents and purposes, rule the music industry are Sony Music Entertainment, Universal Music Group, and Warner Music Group. Okay, so I just wanted to briefly touch on major labels because I think a lot of people have this idea of like, well, what about Columbia Records? What about Aftermath? What about Death Row? All of these things, they exist under the umbrella of these major record labels. It's just like subdivisions.
Yeah,
almost.
Subsidiary is the actual word. Yeah.
So what about people like you and I? You know, independent artists that aren't even signed to an indie label, let alone a major one. Where do we fall into all of this? Surely we're able to operate utterly outside of the major record label's shadow, right? Sadly, that's not the case. Turns out that on Spotify, pretty much every digital streaming services deal with labels, including indie labels, will contain a combination of per stream royalty rate, revenue sharing in advance, and minimum guaranteed revenue. And here's the goofiest part. Did you know that the major labels also have an equity stake in Spotify? Isn't that kind of cool? Right?
Yeah, that's super neat. That's actually the coolest thing I've ever heard you say ever.
That's awesome. Like that there's no way for you to make music and not make the big 3 labels money while you're at it. If you intend to utilize the most commonly used tools by consumers of music in order to make money from making music. It's dope.
Yeah, it's super sick, dude. I love the idea of like someone who had literally nothing to do with any aspect of the creation or sale of this music, making a little tiny little cut every time somebody listens to Kill Bill or a rap song, or like your favorite dude, a random person uploads a audio of them farting and calls it a song. That means that someone is making like a sliver of a cent off of that had nothing to do with it, and they're just chilling, enjoying having equity in the very thing that they're getting the money from. So it's
100%
wonderful. The whole situation is not in timesy. It's fine. Things are good.
Yeah, this is normal. This is what happens. So moving on to Spotify's playlists. Liz Pelly at WATT, the blog half of nonprofit Cash Music, has written the following on the matter. Not all Spotify playlists are created equally. To begin understanding this, look at them closely. Literally, Choose a playlist and browse and look at its cover art. Look in the corner for a logo. Look at another one. Look at all of them. The vast majority of their square-tinted Instagram-like front covers will wear a tiny Spotify insignia. That little circle with slanted waves, the artist who designed the logo says it is a visualization of streaming. On other playlists, you'll occasionally notice different logos. The thick cursive word filter, the all caps logo for Topsify, or simple rounded text reading Digster. These are the playlisting brands owned by the major labels. Filter by Sony, Topsify by Warner, and Digster by Universal. Very rarely you might see an independent label or brand logo. The fact majors own their own playlisting companies servicing Spotify, and that these major owned playlists have prominent placement within the platform should come as no major surprise. Spotify is largely a collaboration with all three major labels. Going deeper down the rabbit hole as the article goes on, Liz concludes, the majority of the so-called editorial content is shaped by Spotify's relationship with the major labels, and if not directly, then indirectly a way in which they uphold the marketing agreements within their deals. And these are excerpts. Go read the full article. It's very insightful. We'll link it, our sources in the description. The fact that the three majors, which, as we've established already, own roughly 80% of all the world's music catalog, own these playlisting brands, control what makes it onto the playlist, have ownership of the content that makes it onto the playlist, and receive yearly guarantees from Spotify, in which these major labels all have a stake in, all goes to show just how rigged the Spotify game really is, as well as this entire industry as a whole, in my opinion. What can we do as artists, right? Sadly, unless we're talking about artists like Taylor Swift, who is a statistical anomaly in the first place and would still rely on a degree of organizing with other top streamed artists in order to have any serious leverage, we don't really have any negotiating power. Our individual values are negligible to corporations of this scale and power. And whether it is by design or not, our industry does a great job of exacerbating a lot of artists' insecurities and narcissism, fueling further alienation in what I see as an already brain-broken, estranged, and cognitively dissonant world. The reality is we can't individually remove ourselves from these streaming services and reasonably expect to find success outside of the current dictated constraints for a wide array of reasons. Take the following case study, for example. Snoop Dogg and Death Row Records. You remember this, Bill, right? A couple years back, Snoop acquired the rights to Death Row. He bought Death Row. That included many dope catalogs that belonged to Death Row. Snoop decided to take that catalog and remove it from Spotify, Apple, and all these other places. And he launched his own app that would just contain the Death Row music, and you would have to subscribe to that. And I remember when he did it, you might remember this. I was talking to you about it. I said, such a stupid move. Stupid only because it's not going to work. There's no chance that in this day and age, you're going to see a huge wave of people who are already paying for Spotify, also now separately add another monthly expense to their list of shit just for the Death Row catalog. For many reasons. Obviously, it's an additional expense, but also just looking for an extra app, knowing that you have to go through the extra steps of opening a different app in the first place goes against the natural instinct of the direction we've been moving into as people consuming media in general. I think everything is being streamlined and simplified as time goes on, right?
For sure. Everything is like convenience is king in like every situation. It feels like when I remember when he took his music off of there, and I remember having that conversation and then being like, well, that sucks. I can't listen to like a bunch of good records, and I'm not going to go out of my way and pay for this thing. So I'm just going to wait for it to come back to Spotify. And he probably lost money. It would have been more money to stay on Spotify and get those streams than he got from taking them off and then making his own app and then people paying him directly, you know?
Yeah,
So,
but you understand where you can at least sympathize with what he was thinking of doing there. It's like, okay, well,
for sure.
if the system is rigged, what if I take my music slightly outside of the system and do my own thing? And it failed, and predictably so, to the point where he inevitably ended up having to re-upload all of that catalog back to all the major streaming services. So now it's back. That thing flopped. But again, you can kind of understand what he was going with, right?
For sure. It's crazy because I've seen people, like I've known people and like seen people like who are just kind of like in our circle, not in our circles, but just people who are like about our level of like listeners on Spotify, you know, try to do the same thing. And I was just like the whole time I was like, dude, if Snoop can't do it, then like what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like there's no way.
Conversation so many times with so many rappers over the years that have come to me for advice or like wanted input on this. And I always told them that it's not a good idea. It won't work under the existing frameworks we exist with, right? You're asking too much of an audience. And if you're small in the first place, right? You're hoping to develop an audience on a service that is not known by everyone. Spotify has the largest pool of people. If Snoop couldn't make it work with Snoop, Dr. Dre, and Tupac albums, what makes you think that you, as an indie artist that no one really knows, can pull it off, right? Again, I can appreciate the intentions, but you have to be practical. You have to understand what world you exist in.
For sure. And as a bit of an aside, I feel like it almost kind of like doesn't work from a standpoint of like, it almost feels like weirdly narcissistic. The idea of like, I have to go listen to this new Kendrick album, but I have to download the Kendrick app to listen to it. Oh, dude, I have to like the idea of like of everyone doing that in mass sounds like the worst time possible. And although I do think that most of the time it's coming from a place of you're doing the right thing or you feel like you're doing something that you deserve to be paid fairly, I just think that it doesn't really serve. It's not going to serve its purpose. You're not. It
doesn't correspond with the reality. You know,
for sure.
It is out of touch.
Yeah, that would be the way I would say it.
Yeah. So as artists, we are cursed to rely on Spotify, regardless of our dissatisfactions with its current state. And thus, we are by default at the mercy of a handful of corporate entities that, for the most part, answer to no one. And in fact, actually wield an unchecked, unprecedented power through market domination, copyright law, and lobbying. By the way, the copyright law is like one of those, oh, we could have a whole episode dedicated to that one day, you know, kind of situations. On top of that, to add insult to injury, independent artists like ourselves end up promoting Spotify free of charge. Spotify Wrapped, for example, is a means of us doing that. Free promo for them. Look, it helps me and Bill generate some attention and excitement for a little while with a post across our social media accounts each time. Don't get me wrong, this is true. But all this content is also heavily Spotify branded and unsurprisingly garners them a big boost in brand awareness every year. Spotify essentially relies on us, its artists, to do free marketing for them. And if we don't participate in it, then it's not like it really harms them in any meaningful capacity, but it does us because there is no organized protest movement with like very clear defined goals, right? So you just out of like, well, I'm not going to do it this time. I'm taking a stand. If you're taking a stand and no one's paying attention and it's not doing anyone good, but it's harming you actively, it's a fool's errand. It's just aesthetics.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is unfortunate that we're used in that way, but I also think it's just like, you know, you do it and then all of a sudden then people get excited about your music. People start talking about your music. You're a part of a bigger thing. You're a part of a zeitgeist, right? Because like every time we do rap that fucking trends on Twitter and then you're a part of a thing Like, hey, it's like Christmas. You gotta, you could be a curmudgeon and not celebrate Christmas or whatever holiday. You know what I mean? But like, not to say that's a curmudgeonly thing, but you know what I'm saying.
I know what you
Like,
mean.
I think that it's the equivalent of being like, oh, you know what? It almost feels like bitter in a way when it's not. It's not bitter to be like that. To be like, hey, I don't want to participate in this thing, but you're gonna have to. It's a weird cycle, and like you were
It
saying earlier,
sucks.
it does play off of artists both wanting to become more successful and also like playing into people's like narcissism or playing into basically using emotional manipulation and financial
Mhm.
manipulation to get you to do a thing, and it looks really fun while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So it's
And look, I
interesting.
do think people who want to protest against it or like, oh, don't support Spotify. I know it comes from a well-meaning place. It's just, again, these things need to be organized efforts. Otherwise, it's not gonna move the needle. And for us as artists, especially those who depend on that check,
Mhm.
we have to participate. With how much power and recklessness these forces wield over us as artists, the oligopoly does not treat us as valuable, worthy, or essential. It is important, however, to remind ourselves every now and then that we are the very ones, again, that provide most of the value to the industry in the first place as the cultivators of music. For now, a way needs to be found to put pressure on Spotify to find a solution for the artists. Whether it's through Spotify introducing a wider range of subscription packages, maybe, in order to tackle the issue, or some other means, something has to be done in order for us artists to be fairly compensated for our work, preferably sooner than later. However, the kind of meaningful pressure that will be needed cannot be achieved through the efforts of a few artists here and there alone. And I also suspect we will inevitably further rely on the solidarity of music consumers as well,
Mhm.
who could certainly help amplify the voices that are otherwise likely forever doomed to be muffled and ignored. So that's in terms of like what we can do. But what about y'all, the average sympathetic consumer of music, the listeners? What can you do in the meantime? Is there any power in or point to unsubscribing from Spotify for now in an act of protest? I don't know. Personally, I don't think there is. It's true that we are, on the one hand, likely to prolong the cycle if we employ these tools, but it's also true that we're likely worse off if we don't, because right now we find ourselves in a position where the tools they wield command most of the value within our industry. For all intents and purposes, there's no realistic way for us to viably navigate music careers in this day and age without relying on Spotify. Just like I didn't really have much of a choice when it came to which platform I would be uploading this podcast with you to, right? Like,
Mm.
it's okay, YouTube, Spotify, where the market exists, right? With how dominant places like YouTube and Spotify are, other options aren't really options. For instance, if this podcast, instead of us uploading the video portion to YouTube, we uploaded it to Dailymotion, I doubt most motherfuckers would be watching these videos.
Yeah, I would
You know
actually
what I
be a
mean?
little bit concerned for you if you were watching it on Daily Motion.
Yeah. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say, in my view, individual practice of ethical consumption, although admirable, is not going to put a dent in existences rooted primarily in systemic exploitation.
Facts. I agree with what you're saying. That is my opinion as well, my friend.
I think it's pretty straightforward. Just I'm advocating for like fair pay and dignity. It's as simple as that. It's not about creating more rich people, right? Let's be real. It's about not allowing a middle class of musicians to be erased from the face of the earth before our very eyes. It's about positioning more people to make a living, not a killing. Put pressure on Spotify and the majors to find a solution for the artists, and hold our politicians, representatives, accountable, and not allowing these monopolizing money-hungry forces to successfully continuously move the regulations goalposts through ever triumphant lobbying efforts, and so on and so forth. And don't buy into their propaganda. The average artist is not out of touch, entitled, or unreasonable in their expectations, as Spotify will oftentimes try to paint us. When Spotify execs talk about artists, they're like, oh, these motherfuckers want even more money, you know? The fact is, we are not too different to workers in any other profession, in that we provide a service in response to an existing demand, a commodified value, and we expect to be fairly compensated for it, so that surviving is not an unnecessary struggle. Regardless of how sexy anyone might romanticize our field to be, we expect society to respect us and work for us as we do for society, as part of an unspoken social contract that binds us all. After all, whether we're talking about a gimmicky music TikTok account popping off today, or bards sweating their asses off to earn a living traveling tavern to tavern hundreds of years ago, or shamans thousands of years before that chanting refrains as they danced around a fire, as far as we know, music has always been a part of who we are as long as we've been around. So please don't let anyone paint musicians as an other in an effort to further divide us. And we already find ourselves fairly divided these days anyway, right?
Yeah.
If the average chef could no longer make a living just chefing, I think we would collectively and rightfully be outraged with this reality, demanding justice for our chefing brothers and sisters. No reasonable person would point to someone like Gordon Ramsay in that instant and say some shit like, higher wages for chefs? Doesn't this guy make enough already? Jeez, how entitled. To be able to have an achievable and reliable standard of living shouldn't be an entitled thing to ask for. It should be the bare minimum everyone is seen as deserving of, in my opinion. Bill disagrees with this, but
yeah, I disagree with everything you said actually this whole time. Yeah, I'm just like musicians just kill them on sight is what I always said.
Being in the music industry in Hollywood, YouTube, Twitch streaming, etc., today I think what many people believe to be an understanding that attention seeking and bread stacking are the key attractions to the people within this industries is actually more often than not a revealing projection of self, you know? I think a lot of people will look at artists and just assume that we navigate purely based on cloud and attention seeking, because there is a relationship between attention and value within this industry, right? So I get that, but it is a very cynical way to look at everyone and apply that to everyone. I think it is, not only is it bad faith, it's also just not, it's just also two-dimensional, or even one-dimensional rather, you know, of a take. Are there any narcissists in this industry? Plenty, yes, absolutely. Yeah. It traditionally garners one more clout value within these industries, given that attention is the key measure of profitability within this industry, which also happens to be very much desirable to narcissists. So the two go hand in hand. But these are all, at the end of the day, just jobs for which, if we are not getting adequately compensated for, many of us will not be able to justify continuing down a creative path. And narcissists exist everywhere. They're not exclusive to this industry. It's just, I guess, if narcissists were moths, you know, these industries are like the brightest lanterns, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think a lot of it too is like narcissists get rewarded in this industry in a way that a lot of other industries they don't get. That kind of like pat on the back, and also just like people acting like narcissists online tend to get reactions. You know, it kind of feeds into itself. You know, so I think that's a thing, but it's not. I mean, they exist everywhere, and I think
but
that,
they do exist everywhere. You and I have had
course.
normal jobs, right? Like I've previously worked in the service industry and in software in an office. Trust me, narcissists are everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Although I personally hold the position that narcissism is something that can be treated and is ultimately just a symptom, an outcome of a variety of factors, many largely circumstantial, not by choice.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. I only bring this up in the first place to address what I perceive as an unfortunate uncharitable attitude that many of us have towards people in the field of arts and entertainment in particular that I've observed, you know? And the forces at the top of the money pyramid, scarcely dispensing the bread we make, are operating only on the behest of their own greed and bottom lines, which regularly manufacturing and stoking the aforementioned alienation, or not alienation, I guess dispersion, cultural or social dispersion, as well as narcissism among its many victims. They prey on that, you know what I mean?
For sure.
Ruthlessly pitting us against one another, on the one hand to stimulate the attention economy, and on the other to keep us apart and disorganized so that we don't really have much power to oppose the existing structures that they are in charge of.
Facts. You're spitting facts, my friend.
And again, I've alluded to this earlier, but one should know that what's going on in the music industry right now is not exclusive to the music industry, sadly. And many others across other fields are victims of very similar, seemingly inescapable cruelties. As time goes on, I hope that more of us are able to identify the cruelties we are subjected to for what they are, and that we learn to successfully challenge these awful conditions out of solidarity, sympathy, empathy, patience, and love for ourselves and our fellow man. One prisoner pointing their finger at another going, "The problem in this prison is that some of our fellow inmates get to wear cooler outfits and get more attention than me," ain't it?
Yeah.
That's a distraction, you know? Don't point
100%.
out the difference in the aesthetics of our cells or our outfits. We're all under the same system. We do have the numbers in theory to be able to have our voices get heard, but it can only happen if the choir sings in unison. And we can only ever organize and move in unison so long as we are effectively acquiring and sharing accurate, valuable information to ensure that we're all more likely to be on the same page, rather than to allow predacious forces to further push us away from one another, which only serves them, not us, a benefit. Ultimately, whatever happens, we will rely on each other's solidarity to be able to achieve any substantial progress on this front. Again, we're some of the lucky ones that are able to live off of our art under the current conditions and remain middle-class musicians despite the odds. But we're lucky exceptions. And our personal financial contentment does not make us blind to the suffering and indignity so many of our fellow brothers and sisters are subjected to.
Well said. Well said.
So yeah, I guess in short, shit sucks.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
situation's kind of fucked.
yeah,
But
TLDR, this whole thing kind of blows, bro.
this thing blows, but I have optimism. Am I positive or optimistic that there will be changes within our lifetimes? I don't know if I'd go that far, but I do believe things can change, and I just like to believe that they will, rather than they won't.
For sure. I think that it just takes time, and it takes a bit of working together, a little bit of unionization. But I think that it's hopefully this won't be a problem for our kids or our grandkids, you know, going forward, that we kind of streamline and figure out this thing where it's not just a bunch of people who are not really involved in things getting the major share of everything all the time, you know.
And to some of the listeners, I do want to impart this. Don't make individuals into enemies. There's a lot of artists, our peers, who operate in a way that conforms with these structures, that just accepts it for what they are, and they're, you know, they have the Sigma grind set, that they got to work, and that through, you know, meritocracy, anything can be accomplished. Shouting at those people, or shouting at people like us for using Spotify, is a waste of energy and will only serve to divide us further than we already are I think solidarity isn't about, trying to vocally express how righteous or cool you are compared to others. It's about understanding that, like, this is what it is. And some of us are in the know, and some of us are not. And some of us buy into the gospel of capitalism and all of that because that's all we know. That's what most of us grow up with. And shouting at them for the songs that they recite, so to speak, right, that they did not write the lyrics to, is just misguided. Patience is going to be very much required from all of us. It sucks. It should get you riled up. A lot of this shit sucks, not just within this industry, but most industries. But taking it out on other workers, even if they are blind or stupid to their own suffering, right, is not gonna shift the needle in any meaningful way. Anyway, so that's the conversation of Spotify. And shout out Spotify for their wonderful algorithms and for helping pay our bills. And also, fuck you, Spotify, for robbing us blind in the same breath.
Yeah, real love-hate thing going on there.
They have a new thing now where, isn't it like if you have fewer than, they kind of have like a YouTube style partnership program where it's like if you have fewer than 1,000 plays a month or something like that, they don't pay you for any of those listens.
Hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah. I love that. I love that that's the thing they've implemented.
It's a great thing that, from a selfish standpoint, this will not affect you and I, but it is crazy. It's just another mode of extracting more profit and more value from their workers without compensating them, right? Is just taking, because they're still getting value off of that. Spotify, best believe, is still getting value. It's just now they're not spreading it out the same way. And unless something is done, we're just going to continue to see this trend of exploitation and rules changing that will favor profit maximization and output, while it's reducing, in the same breath, labor force and not paying the producers of the value anymore, perhaps even paying us less, because the more dominant something like Spotify is, the more power they have to pull some shit like that. Because if they tell us tomorrow they're paying us less, we'll all be mad. But unless we're unified and do something about it, we're just going to have to live with it, because there are no other viable alternatives, as we discussed, right? That's what I hope will resonate with a lot of our viewers. I'm pretty sure a lot of them already suspected that this was the case or understood this to be the case. I do think most people don't know the relationship between the major labels, the playlisting companies, and Spotify. Hopefully that has provided some new insights to some of you guys. Sorry for yapping again, Bill. You're Kill Bill the rapper, and I'm Rav the yapper.
Yeah, man. The catastrophic levels of yappery today.
Yappery, absolutely.
You got to figure it out, brother, because I don't know if I can. I don't listen to podcasts to hear people talk.
True. My fault.
I listen for
OG.
grunting and weird kind of guttural noises. That's kind of where I'm at. The stage of life I'm at right now.
So I think it's time for obscure hip hop facts with Rav and Kill Bill the rapper.
What?
Did you know that Q-Tip introduced Dilla to Pharcyde, and when he did so, they initially thought that he made Dilla up? This is what Slim Kid 3 said about this. We were looking for Q-Tip to do some tracks for us. Tip would be like, yeah, I'm getting some stuff together. He couldn't do what needed to be done, but he said, you can check my boy. And we were like, okay, who is it? He was like, JD. We didn't even believe JD existed because Q-Tip's name is Jonathan Davis. We thought it was Q-Tip pretending that was his little spin-off name. So that's an interesting story, right? And then, of course, Tip brought a bunch of beats over. JD came to Los Angeles and had his SB 1200, and he would flip a bunch of beats for Pharcyde. But it's just interesting, I think in general it's interesting. I think not many people know that Q-Tip essentially put Dilla on initially.
Yeah.
He got put onto them through De La, and he then connected with JD, who was a huge fan of Q-Tip. Who Q-Tip was very much instrumental to JD finding his style
For
within
sure.
hip hop. And JD ended up sort of becoming a member of A Tribe Called Quest for a time, producing most of the Love Movement, co-producing it with Q-Tip.
The beats on that album.
Yeah, Find My Way is it Find a Way is still one of my favorite Tribe songs.
It's so good. The production is insane on that song, dude.
Yeah, it's so fucking good. So shouts out Tribe, shouts out Farside, and shouts out Jay Dilla. Rest in peace.
R.I.P. R.I.P. one of the GOATs. Did you know that Jay-Z and Eminem's song Renegade was originally a song with Eminem and Royce the 5'9"? Apparently, when he was working on the Bad Meets Evil project with Royce the 5'9", Eminem was shopping the song around to different people, and he sent it over to Jay-Z, and Jay-Z was approaching some deadlines at the time and wanted a song with Eminem. And so they ended up cutting Royce out of it. And actually, Royce has talked about this a little bit, but this is what Royce had to say about it. Jay-Z was at a deadline and he had been asking M to get on something. M didn't want to miss Jay's deadline because obviously he respects him. I don't think he had time to go in and do a whole new joint. So he called me and asked if it was cool with just giving Jay that one and we'll do something else. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Why would I feel regret if that's one of M's signature songs? That's a great thing for him, and I don't think the song would have reached the potential it reached with him and Jay-Z if it was me and him, because Interscope wouldn't even clear him for that song anyways. Thought that was a kind of interesting little fact. Almost had Royce on there.
Yeah, that is an interesting fact. Huh.
Yeah. Or it could have just been an Eminem and Royce song. And I don't feel like it would have been as big of a, and now people say the phrase like, oh, you got renegaded, a person who out raps you on the same song, So yeah. It's an interesting fact that whole little thing like almost never happened. Yeah.
I agree, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
I really do agree, though. I hope you know that shit.
Man, I don't believe a word you're saying about anything, dog.
Did you know that key founder of Scribble Jam, an annual hip-hop festival that was held between the years 96 and 2009, Mr. Dibbs, has been a touring DJ for Atmosphere and LP in the past. Furthermore, he once put out an album through Rhymesayers.
Wow,
Yeah.
That's super duper interesting. I never knew that. That's really interesting that you put out an album through Rhymesayers.
Yeah. The way he put together Scribble Jam is he got together with the magazine, graffiti magazine Scribble in 96 to put out the first Scribble Jam event as a promotion for the magazine's launch.
That's crazy.
The event then became the largest, America's largest hip hop festival, with separate competitors for rapping, DJing, graffiti, b-boying, and beatboxing. Its past participants and guests have included Juice, Eminem, Peace, Idea, Sage Francis, No Can Do, Rhymefest, and many more. Many people will, of course, be familiar with Scribble Jam because of Eminem. Some people, if you're in the battle rap world, you know. Everyone knows about Scribble Jam.
Yeah.
You might know of it if you're a younger battle rap fan through people like Thesaurus, who came.
He came. No, he was first twice. He was the two-time champion.
Back to back, 2 years in a row, he came first. That's right. Also, indie hip hop fans might know of Scribble Jam through Idea and Abilities. The year that they participated, Idea was the winner in the rapping portion of Scribble Jam, and DJ Abilities was the winner in the DJing portion of Scribble Jam. So it's kind of cool. Like, here's this duo that is like, whoa, they're the best in their respective fields in the competitive, field of hip hop. So shout outs Mr. Dibbs, and the fact that he ended up putting something out with Rhymesayers makes sense somehow, you know? And the fact that he's DJ'd for LP and Atmosphere on tour is also cool. Is also like, whoa, but also makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense, but it's also like neat.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
so that's the thing. What you got over there, young man?
I got a crazy one. I actually did not know this until I looked it up. So did you know that Prince was meant to feature on "To Pimp a Butterfly" by Kendrick Lamar?
I did not know this. No.
Yeah, apparently he wanted him on. He wanted Prince on the song "Complexion," a Zulu Love. I believe Rhapsody is on that song, and they've both since talked about it. But basically, Rhapsody said he wanted to talk about the beauty of black people. I told him, say no more. What tripped me out is Kendrick originally said he didn't want to do a verse on there. He wanted me to do 2 verses and Prince do a hook. And then Kendrick in the same article said, that's true. Prince heard the record, loved the record, and the concept of the record got us to talking. We got to a point where we were just talking in the studio, and the more time that passed, we realized we weren't recording anything. We just ran out of time. It's as simple as that. So he actually had Prince in the studio ready to record, and then they just had a rousing conversation, and then they just ran out of time in the studio. So we almost got Prince on "Complexion" of Zulu Love, which would have been crazy.
That would have been so
I just thought that was really crazy. And there is
dope.
a timeline. Yeah, there's a timeline where that existed, but we do not live in it, sadly.
Did you know that Nicholas F., dope, independent rapper, producer, collaborator of Lil Ugly Mane's, once worked and wrote for Drake before Drake blew up?
That's crazy. What?
Yes, Nicholas F. and Drake met on MySpace. Nicholas F. says, it was a random MySpace email. He said he liked my music and wanted to do a record. It was the Money record. I had no idea who he was, but I checked his screen and saw he had a lot of followers, and I listened to his music. He could spit, so I was down for it. So I did the record, and it came out good, and we did more records, and we always kept in touch after that. Drake says Nicholas F. is the reason he started rapping.
That's super crazy. That is so wild.
For those that don't know, Nicholas F., who is known as Nick Fury until 2004, is a rapper and contemporary R&B writer from Richmond, Virginia. He's best known for being BET's 106 & Park Freestyle Friday champion 7 weeks in a row and being inducted into its Hall of Fame in 2007. Also, Nicholas F. Wrote for Drake for a little bit. Some of the stuff. He helped co-write it, you know.
Let me interject really quick.
Yes.
I had no idea that Nicholas F. was Nick Fury because I remember watching Nick Fury freestyle on BET.
It's cool,
and
right?
This is something like you're blowing my mind twice here, okay? Because it's like on one hand it's the Drake thing, and on the other hand it's like this other like forgotten memory, you know, just unearthed right there. It's crazy.
Yeah, I thought you would appreciate that fact. But yeah, who would have thought, you know? They now feel like such different worlds, you know? You think Nicholas F. these days, I think you're more likely to associate him with someone like Lil Ugly Mane and not Drake. So if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with Nicholas F.'s work, go peep his album Stuck from a few years back. If you want a song to start with, you got to check Trill Burr out. That shit is so catchy. It'll get you hooked.
Banger.
So, yeah, that's a fact. Bye.
You killed it. Yeah, so I got my next one. Did you know that Lil Dicky put out a project in 2008 under the name Detective Dickums? And the project is titled I'm Detective Dickums.
Huh.
Yeah, it's a real crazy one. You know, I get it because it's kind of like maybe from like a comedy angle or something like that. You know, it's Detective Dickums, but it seemed like it was a pretty serious record at the time, and it was a lot of like detective bars, which I think was a niche that, especially in 2008, people weren't doing the grizzled detective thing. The last name may have been a little unfortunate, but he's kind of on his way to figuring out who he is as Lil Dicky later on in life.
That's right. He even went on Sway in the Morning during the press release for the project, didn't he? Right, and say something along the lines like, "This is my To Pimp a Butterfly."
In 2008, yeah, he said that.
Oops, I forgot you said 2008.
Yeah, the jig is up. Detective Dickums only exists in my head canon. Get over it, liberals. No, I don't know. It's not true.
But in our head canon, it is.
Yeah, that's all that matters. That's what I told the judge.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Bill, what the heck is going on with our Patreon? Some special is happening, ain't it?
What?
Explain.
What? Oh my God, we're giving you guys a new tier to subscribe to on Patreon. You might be thinking to yourself, wow, $5 to give them a month, not enough money. Well, we will take more money from you if you wish for that to happen.
It's a win-win.
Yeah. You got too much money. We have too little money. Let's figure it out. Let's do
this.
Yeah. Would you like to go into the terms and conditions a little bit?
Well, I'm going to just say this. It's not just going to be $20 for nothing. We're going to give you certain privileges that the base $5 tier patrons won't have access to. For one, we will begin displaying a list of our new tier patrons at the start of all episodes going forward. So if you're watching the video version of this podcast, you will see your name flash on the screen before the start of every episode. You will also get an opportunity to participate in a new segment that we will be introducing to the Patreon episode from next week onwards. So before we explain that, why don't you explain to them, why don't you go over the launch of the Void FM Discord server?
Well, we're starting a Void FM Discord server where you can go in. You can go in there and you can click around and talk to other people who are like-minded, who are weirdos who watch Void FM. Cut that out. You could, it's just going to be like a nice little hub for everybody. However, we're going to be utilizing this Discord for the segment that Rav has brought up, where we interact with you guys. If you are in that $20 tier, we interact with y'all, and then you can ask us for advice and stuff like that. But actually, basically how it's going to work is everyone's going to be in a call, everyone's going to be muted, and then we'll unmute people one by one. And you can ask us a question that has to do with the topic that we're talking about at hand. So it won't just be like a normal Q&A, although I'm sure we will do some of that at some point. But it'll be more along the lines of you asking us for, like, I don't know, like music advice or romance advice or, like just random
just general life advice, whatever kind of advice you want. Obviously, take it with a grain of salt. You're asking us, right?
Yeah, I'm an idiot.
Yes, but we will not be able to go through everyone each time, but you have an opportunity to participate in it if you so wish. We will probably allot a slot and a certain amount of time of the Patreon version of the podcast. The advice corner will be exclusive, as Bill pointed out, to the new tier of patrons. The rest of the server will be accessible to all of the patrons of Void FM. So if you want to show your boys even more monetary support and get more content out of us, that is a way for you to do so. Thank you so much for supporting us. We really appreciate you. We're very happy that you tune in to listen to us yap. So
hell yeah,
thanks for that.
Ditto.
Yeah, tell them that they should spend $5 and then tell them that they should spend $20 or something. I don't know.
Okay. Well, you should be spending $5 right now. However, you should really be spending $20. What are you going to do with that $20, huh? Go buy a bunch of bullshit? You're going to go buy a movie ticket? Dumb. Cinema is dead. I've always said that. But you know what's not dead? The Void FM Patreon. Especially not now that we got this new tier. Oh, it's about to be popping off. I might do a little cartwheel. I'm not going to do a cartwheel. I'm going to be real with y'all. I'm just lying. It's not real. It's not real. This is all, it's all simulation. We're all going to die one day. Give us your money.
Yeah. Basically, we got a new tier. Like we killed a new fellow prisoner.
Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? All right, Mitch, take us out on something not cringy.
Skibbity toilet.
Okay.
Okay, I'll do a different thing.
No, that's it.
No,
Bye.
no, just leave it there. Yeah, bye.
The following is a preview of this week's Patreon exclusive episode. Available now over on the Void FM podcast Patreon.
Bill, I just found out earlier today why they call it a peg leg. And boy.
And why do they call it that?
Oh, looks like you're home, Bill. Literally 1-to-1.
Yeah,
literally 1-to-1 the homie we're in.
It looks just like it. Yeah, you're right. 1-to-1.
That's so cool that you let them model it based off of your crib. Can you sing me a little ditty, but make sure it's a reggaeton ditty?